Hi guys, happy Thursday, May 7th. It's the last day of this school week because no school on Friday for the district, so I didn't make a daily schedule slide, so you get a 3-day weekend to catch up on work or relax, I guess, if you're all caught up on your work. But I do suggest using this 3-day weekend to your advantage because there's no new assignments and you can use it to catch up, especially if you haven't finished stuff from last unit. So we are going to go over logical fallacies today, which I mentioned yesterday that we were going to go over today when it came to that second argument video, the funny Monty Python one. So let's get into this PowerPoint. So this is another PowerPoint that is or was created by Mrs. Inlay. So shout out to Mrs. Inlay. So logical fallacies, what are they? They are potential vulnerabilities or weaknesses in an argument. They often come from a failure to make a logical connection between the claim and the evidence used to support it. When planning your arguments, look for holes in your reasoning and logic. And how do you do that? How complete is the argument you have made? What places could your opponent poke holes in your argument? How would you come back at them? It's all about anticipating what they will say and having a response. So you have to learn both sides of an argument in order to form an argument for your side, because knowing the holes that they can poke, your opponent can poke in your argument, helps you solidify your argument. So types of logical fallacies. Slippery slope. A fallacy of argument exaggerating the possibility that a relatively inconsequential action or choice today will have serious adverse consequences tomorrow. So it's mostly about exaggerating. Don't exaggerate your point. State the facts and use research to support those facts that you have, because if you go too extreme and you don't have the evidence to back it up, then that is where your opponent can poke holes. Because you could say something, if you were fighting about school uniforms and whether they make a difference or not, and you're for uniforms, and you argue something as extreme as the teenagers will rebel and they all will get into drugs and alcohol, and they'll fail high school if we do not have uniforms within, let's say, the next 15 years. One, if you don't have those facts, scientific facts to support that, that is an easy thing that your opponent can poke holes in. So exaggerations, don't use them. Bandwagon appeals. A fallacy of argument in which a course of action is recommended on the grounds that everyone else will follow it. So bandwagon appeals, everybody's going to do this someday. Well, that's not exactly true. Everybody's going to be using school uniforms. So you should too. It's not solid because you can't control other people's actions, and you can't even really predict them. Hasty generalization. A fallacy in which a faulty conclusion is reached because of inadequate evidence. Example, smoking isn't bad for you. My great aunt smoked a pack a day and lived to be 90. Generalization. Just because one person smoked all their lives and lived till they were 90 doesn't mean other people will. Circular reasoning. A fallacy in which the argument repeats the claim as a way to provide evidence. Example, you can't give me a C, I'm an A student. Well, not today. You might usually be an A student, but on this assignment, or in this course, you got a C because you didn't put in that A effort. Circular reasoning. Circular reasoning was very common in that video that we watched, that Monty Python funny video. Faulty causality. A fallacy of argument making the unwarranted assumption that because one event follows another, the first event caused the second. Also referred to as post hoc ergo propter hoc. Form of the basis of many superstitions. This is kind of what comes. So if you walk under a ladder, you'll get bad luck. Or if a black cat crosses your path, death is to come, or more bad luck is to come. Or if you break a mirror, you'll get 7 years bad luck. It's causality. Just because you broke a mirror doesn't mean that, and you had bad luck for the next 7 years, doesn't mean that the broken mirror caused it. Or just because you stepped on a crack and then your mother's back broke, doesn't mean it was because you stepped on a crack in the sidewalk. Okay? And then begging the question, a fallacy of argument in which a claim is based on the very grounds that are in doubt or dispute. Rita can't be a good jeweler thief because she's never stolen anything. And then next one is non sequitur. A fallacy of argument in which claims, reasons, or warrants fail to connect logically. One point doesn't follow from another. If you're really my friend, you'll loan me $500. Well, just because I can be a really good friend without loaning you $500. You can poke holes in that. Red herring, a type of logical fallacy wherein the speaker relies on distraction to derail an argument, usually by skipping to a new or irrelevant topic. The term derives from the dried fish that trainers use to distract dogs when teaching them to hunt foxes. Ad hominem fallacy, Latin for to the man, and refers to the specific diversion tactic of switching the argument from issues at hand to the character of the speaker. For example, if you argue that a park in your community should not be built by a particular person because they were arrested for a domestic dispute, then you are guilty of ad hominem fallacy. So more going off on a totally different side, attacking the other speaker usually, saying, well, this person supports it, so therefore it can't be good. Well, just because this person supports it and they were in prison for 20 years doesn't mean that their argument or their side is technically wrong. So red herring. Then there's the faulty analogy, a fallacy that occurs when an analogy compares two things that are not comparable. For instance, to argue that because we put animals who are in irreversible pain out of their misery, so we should do the same for people, ask the reader to ignore significant and profound differences between animals and people. Straw man fallacy, a fallacy that occurs when a speaker chooses a deliberately poor or oversimplified example in order to ridicule or refute the idea. So a very weak example, using weak examples. False dilemma, the either-or fallacy, a fallacy in which the speaker presents two extreme options as the only possible choices. So I suggest that we stop drinking water because that will increase our water supplies for future generations. Very extreme option in order to keep water sustainable and have it there in the future for future generations. Equivocation, a fallacy that uses a term or terms with two or more meanings in an attempt to misrepresent or deceive. So it uses a term with two or more meanings in an attempt to misinterpret or deceive. So there's a lot of terms, as we've talked about before earlier on when we were talking about literary elements, that have different meanings, multiple meanings, and therefore using that term can misrepresent or deceive your listeners or your audience, and therefore cause a fallacy. So that's the last of the logical fallacies. So think of this and consider this when you're not only reading arguments, but you're also formatting arguments and listening to arguments. So that is actually all I have for you today. just that logical fallacies, which we will touch upon again next week. But I want you to use this time to catch up on all your work. So use this 3-day weekend to catch up and turn in assignments that you've completed or maybe that you forgot to turn in, or ones that you haven't completed and need to work on and then turn in to me so that I can get those grades in the grade book. All right? Okay. Email me if you need any help with anything, okay? And if you need a virtual meeting between the two of us, my schedule's pretty free usually, so please email me. Ask for an appointment. Glad to schedule one. All right. See you guys next week. Bye.